Good afternoon, good evening, and wherever you are listening to in the world today. We're live. My name's Jason Cooper, and I'm your host for Positive People on serenityradio.co.uk. I have to get that right because I didn't get that right last time. And apologies for Michelle. I know you're listening right now, but it's one of those things. Awesome. I'm absolutely delighted because I've got another Cooper involved today, which is Ruth Cooper-Dickson, which is, I'm sure we're related somewhere along the lines.
Probably.
So just a little bit about me. I've been in sort of sales and marketing for about 25 years. And what I've really noticed along my journey is some of the most successful people out there, and the people that I really got on with have something slightly different. They have a positive mindset. As much as adversity kicks them down and as much as anything else, sort of whatever happens, but they tend to just pick themselves up really quickly and they get over rejection really quickly and they just move on forward. So I've always been fascinated by people's mind and their mindset. So which sort of relays me on to doing this show. And I'm always really delighted to be speaking to some wonderful people. And today, Ruth, welcome and welcome to the Cooper family.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So what's the connection? You got a hyphen there. So what's the connection with the Cooper? Tell me that.
So Cooper is my maiden name. And so that came obviously from my father, and I was married previously and actually ended up changing my name by default to Cooper-Dickson. Subsequently, I am divorced now, but because it was at the point where, as you will know, in sales and marketing, people get to know your name. And actually, I think for me, I kind of owned that name and made it, and people feel like they've always called me, they don't even see it as any relation to, my ex-partner. And so RC, I'm often known by RCD as well. So it's just, and I just love it. So I just embraced it as my own. And I think as I created it, it wasn't like that was my ex-partner's full name. So I feel like it's part of me. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to keep the Cooper side of it because barrel makers have to stick together,
We do.
So a little bit about you, but I want you to give a little bit better introduction than I can. So you're founder, you're managing director of this wonderful company called Champs, and you started this in 2015. And there's me looking to one side and reading your career in talent inclusion and business improvement strategy after difficult experience of burnout at work, like we all know about that. And first, how many organizations struggle to support their people with mental well-being, which is probably more key now than we've ever seen it before, because there's a lot of sort of anxiety, a lot of stress. And I think even in Dublin now, we're in second lockdown. And first lockdown, I didn't really feel it. Second lockdown, I feel a little bit more anxious and tense about it because it's just carrying on and on and on and on. And I can sort of I know all these tools and processes to get myself out of it, but even so, we still get ourselves worked up about silly little things as much as we meditate and do this, that, and the other, and whatever else. But it's good to hear it from your side and the wonderful work that you're doing in the world today. So tell me a little bit of your backstory before we get into your business and what you do now and where you are now, because that's also quite intriguing. Tell me a little bit before you got into all of this and where you brought up, and then there's sort of the anchor point of you got into the positive psychology and everything else that you do now.
Okay. How long have you got? Right. So
we've got 45 minutes.
I had a long career in, as you said, in business improvement, strategy, project management. I initially started out my career at Rolls-Royce Aerospace because I'm from Derby, and that is where a lot of people end up working, usually at Rolls-Royce or Toyota or Nestle, or there's some various big companies and factories, JCB, around the area. And back then in the late 90s, it was a place where they sponsored me to do my graduate degree, my first degree in business studies, which was very nice. And I used to go off to university at Nottingham Trent on a Wednesday. I kind of spent my time working through different departments, and I always kind of worked with people around change projects. So I always had a lens around working with people. And then I left. I went off to Australia because after September the 11th, the industry was making downturns, as we've seen back in 2002, and went off to Australia, did my MA in international business and majored in marketing out there. So I spent a lot of time working in magazine publishing and PR, and then came back and moved to London and worked in recruitment and talent. And that's kind of where I then started doing talent projects. So I did both recruitment in-house. I worked in investment banking, and then I worked in wealth management. So again, completely different industries. And some roles were pure recruitment talent roles, but there was a lot that was around project management, HR projects, learning development projects. So I'm not a HR generalist, and I wasn't even actually trained as a learning and development professional. But I had that lens, I guess, and also working at the coal face of operations. So I was never sitting in those support roles. I was always kind of doing the do, and kind of understood what it meant to be, you know, in the actual business itself, which I think was hugely beneficial to actually when I came to set up my own business, because I had a lot of these skills. And working in recruitment as well was very much around building your own desk, your own business in a very much an entrepreneurial sense. So I think that you know, those sorts of skills, you know, I think that they just naturally came with me. And then when I went out to Hong Kong, I worked in Hong Kong doing financial recruitment, tech recruitment. So I was creating teams for project managers and business analysts. So I kind of traveled quite a lot, and then I came back to the UK, and I ended up working more broadly in diversity and inclusion, initially within talent, and it was in the mid to late 2000s, so around 2011, 2012, when there was a real push, especially in London, in the cities and other global cities, around diverse talent. When they said diverse, they generally meant more about women in leadership roles, but there was obviously beginning to be a focus on LGBTQ plus and also BAME talent, and focusing on, you know, diversity of boards. And that's when the Lord Davis review came out, wanting, you know, the FTSE 100 to have women on boards. So I started to work with this consultancy and worked my way up in this consultancy. I was on the board. And then I went through a life experience, as many of us do. I had a relationship breakdown. That's where the name, obviously, I alluded to that before. And I ended up going through a divorce, which is just, a stressful life circumstance that many of us can relate to. And what I did was, though, I used work as a way to detract from what was going off at home. Again, like what many of us do, we throw ourselves into work. And I was a high performer anyway, and I was just really pushing those hours. I was commuting from Derbyshire to London quite a bit. I was opening an office in London at the time, so I was probably on average having 3 to 4 hours sleep a night. I was using exercise and being healthy as coping mechanisms, which again, when we think about stress relieving coping mechanisms, we think, oh, exercise, that's great, or healthy eating, that's really important. But actually, like everything, there's a continuum, which is why I always hate the idea of some coping mechanisms are helpful, some are unhelpful, because there's always a balance. And what I ended up having was a real addictive, compulsive behavior towards exercise, which I now know it's called low level thinking, when you're kind of numbing your body to match the brain and kind of taking away from feeling. And I guess in some cases a form of self-harm. And then also ended up with disordered eating practice, very much around restriction, again linked into mental ill health around control. So everything else was going to crap in my world, so it was something I could control. And literally, I was just very, very unwell. And what happened was I had a very public, as I call it, meltdown in my chief exec's office, which is never the best place to have a meltdown.
No, no.
With the glass windows and everyone going, oh my goodness. And really being very unwell, going home, and then subsequently having quite a bit of time off work, and having very quickly, very hugely fortunate and I guess privileged. We talk about especially white privilege as well, to have immediate support, immediate help, and a bit of a lottery postcode probably as to where I was living. The fact I could travel to support and therapy, I had my own transport, but I was able to access that support quite quickly. And from there was diagnosed with several anxiety disorders, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. And really, that was more like light bulb moments for me, because since now the work I do and all the research and the work, the partners I work with, I know that anxiety disorders do come from a complex mix of risk factors, of which I was probably a top candidate. I'd always had panic attacks. I remember having them very early on in my career at Rolls-Royce, but not knowing what they were and thinking it was something wrong with me. Yeah, like, oh
I've
my
had
God.
them as well, and it's sort of it's from the chest. Get shallow breathing, your head goes really dizzy, and your voice gets really sort of shaky. I had that when I was working in London, and so it's no different. So I can understand that.
I mean, mine, and the reason I call them meltdowns is because I have this where literally I go from looking like this to dripping with water, with sweat, in the space of less than a minute. And that's why I was thinking of the Wicked Witch of the West when she's in The Wizard of Oz, if anyone knows that reference, where she's like, I'm melting. And that's what I look like. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like I've got a bucket of water and just chucked it over my head. And so I used to have all these coping mechanisms, avoidance strategies, and just used to think, and back then no one really talked about it at all. No one knew. I thought it might be my blood pressure, or I'm too overexcitable, or I'm not confident enough, all the inner dialogue. But actually that was a huge light bulb moment. And since the last 5 years, because that was in 2015, the last 5 years, I'm still in recovery. That has been very much a journey as part of that. And so it's been, I guess my whole career has taken me on this path. And I always remember reading a quote that Steve Jobs said about when you look back at your past, you kind of are able to see those dots that connect together to make to where you are today. And I think at the time you don't really realize that. But being able to retrospectively look back now with a lot of self-awareness, you can kind of see how all these points have brought me to where I am, which That's is awesome.
I really like that. Look, number one, I thank you for your honesty there, because I think it's good to show the world, and as we know, it gets a high connection with people. And there's a lot of I know this word's been bounced around, but your authentic self actually comes through. And once you actually realize and understand what has gone through in your life, there's a sort of an inner peace that's gone on, because you've actually confirmed what you did and what actually had happened at one stage in your life. And like I take my hat off to you for actually sharing that story, because it does show people that are listening right now that might be going through a similar sort of pattern, for them to take a sort of a step back and a breath, to actually realize that work sometimes does get the better of you. Your life around you, your situations and everything else can get the better of you. So it's good that you've probably realized to a certain extent what has actually happened, and like you dealt with it. And now it's time for you to actually sort of step forward and sort of go, I've done it. Now what I can do is help others in sort of whatever situations that they're in, so that they can all move forward. So that is awesome. So appreciate that. And you have a big smile on your face today. So that's absolutely wonderful. What we're going to actually do right now is just take a quick 10 seconds break, and then we'll come back after the break, and we'll dig a little bit deeper. So welcome back to positive people on serenityradio.co.uk. So I've got it right again. So that's absolutely awesome. Today, I have an awesome guest. And for me, that's for what you've just said is absolutely incredible. So really good journey and a really good sort of story, and a really good powerful story. And so Ruth Cooper, I'm going to say Cooper-Dickson. Don't worry about the Dixon. That's you know, that's, but I laugh and joke. So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now with your company. So I've had a look at, we bounce emails backwards and forwards and I've had a look onto your website. Tell me a little bit more about that. So when you set up in 2015, so tell me what you're doing now.
So Shams came about because after I'd had my mental ill health, conditions diagnosed, and I was going through the early journey of recovery. I think when I was going back into the workplace, and I worked for a lovely company at the time, no one really knew how to have the conversation with me around mental ill health and me being off. So there was that fear, very much so. And we're talking 5 years ago when there wasn't really no one was talking about it at all. And I remember thinking, I'm going to choose to be really open about this. And so people would say to me, I was very, very much a front-facing, client-facing role, and people would say, "Oh, you've been out of the business for several months. Like, is everything okay?" And I was like, "Oh, I've had some mental ill health problems. I had a breakdown, I'm working through it. I'm getting there, but it's going to be a long journey." And either people were really shocked and really uncomfortable and didn't know what to say, which actually made me kind of push it even more, just to see that that's my dark sense of humor, which I've definitely developed over the years. And or people, but the majority had a real kind of, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" And, "Oh, do you know what? Something happened to me," or "Something happened to my colleague," or there was a story. And for me, that was the real catalyst of understanding that. And I just didn't even think about, I genuinely didn't think about starting a business. I knew I wanted to go off and do stuff on my own. I knew I needed that breathing space. So I started initially doing diversity and inclusion consultancy work as an associate, as a consultant in my own right. But I always believed wellbeing was the wrapper that sat around about who we were, because it does fluctuate and change. As you said, like when you worked in London, when we're all going through really tough circumstances at the moment globally, but when other bereavements, moving house, having a stressful time at work, worrying about the kids, we've all got that stuff that goes off, and we do change as we get older. As I found, going into my 40s, each decade's been very different for me. So I think for me, wellbeing was always something that we had to take into consideration. And then I was starting to do more of that work, and then there was like a tipping point in 2018 where I really had to decide, am I going to kind of go for it and cut ties with all the associates, because this is something I really want to do. And I did. So I did that first of all, and I trained as a mental health first aider. At the time, I was living in the Collective, which was the world's largest co-living space in West London. There's about 550 residents, and I describe it as a cross between university halls for adults and a hotel. And it was a great experience because it was a real community, and I lived there for a year. And what I said to the community managers was, I'm not in a corporate, I can't be a mental health first aider in a corporate. Why don't I run 2 weekly drop-in sessions, an hour a week, so one at the week, one at the weekend, and people can just drop in 10-15 minutes. It's not counseling, it's not therapy, but they can come for signposting, they can come for a chat, or if you have a crisis, you know where I am. And they were just obviously like, yeah, 100%. And that really helped me cut my teeth on understanding people and understanding what it meant to be a mental health first aid and understanding my own boundaries. So whilst I was doing that, I was building Shams up. And then in 2019, last year, we went global. So we were in lots of different countries. Our clients are predominantly global corporates, like big organizations that do have the money to spend on this agenda. And we do a whole range of support for them. But really, because my CEO, Tara Kent, joined last year, so she's been with the business a year. She was an associate for some time, but Tara's got a fantastic background in organizational change and behavior and leadership, as well as the mental health lens. And I came from the diversity and inclusion space, and then also positive psychology, which I'll talk about. But I think together our vision has been very much around, it's more than fruit baskets on a Friday or yoga twice a week. And it's been very much around, we've not worked with organizations who, just say, oh, I want 50 mental health first aiders and that's all I'm doing, which clearly is never going to work in an organization. It's, so if the leadership aren't bought in, if there's not a support system there for the mental health first aiders. So it's very much around holistic working with the organization. I'm really proud to say that our clients, when they work with us, it's really rare that they don't continue that journey because of how they see us as that trusted partner. And we feel like family. We get to know them. And even though we're doing very similar types of workshops or training, it's always bespoke to the organization and what they want as their outcomes. And we're very clear about what that return on investment can look like. And, we sort of say, well, if you're expecting this to change the bottom line, then it probably won't, but you need to do all these other parts. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle, really. And that's what I love.
I was going to ask you actually, because I interviewed a guy called Ted Rubin a few months ago. He actually talks about return on relationship as opposed to return on investment. And return on relationships, really nice linguistic way of paraphrasing it back. So hypothetically, what's a typical thing? Say you went into LinkedIn or someone like that. What is the typical sort of approach that you would offer? Like that, a typical approach, just so I can really understand what you might do when you go in to see them.
We would have obviously have various conversations around what are their hotspot areas, what sorts are on their agenda. We'd look at any data that they have around. So if they've been collecting information from employee wellbeing surveys, employment surveys, pulse point surveys, any data around absence and mental health, anything that they've got, either qualitative and quantitative. And then it will just depend. I mean, it can be, often it's more about educating managers. That's usually the starting point. I mean, the leadership is really important. And I think to get the board level, when we get to start with board level, that's fantastic, because you're almost given then an opportunity to bring that down through the ranks. But as well, it's usually, we find, I call it the marzipan layer. So, you've got the icing involved, but it's the marzipan level in that Christmas cake that gets squashed. And they're the ones that often have their own, they're trying to manage targets and deliverables up, and they're also trying to manage teams and look after themselves. They're often the ones that aren't given the information, or they're not given the guidance or support or the knowledge to be able to handle those conversations or know where to signpost. And it doesn't come from a bad place of intent. It just comes down to often time, the cultural impact of what the business is like, and also the ability to get them through some training or a workshop. So often it's around the training and workshops with the managers, and these have to be ongoing. It's usually around providing support, such as mental wealth champions, as we call them. So those people within the business, and mental health first aiders that are trained to kind of support certain business areas. And then, more general, what we've been doing a lot of this year is webinars that focus on areas, things like, we've had fantastic associates who work in the worlds of, child psychologists. We've had somebody work with us around returning to school after the summer with COVID and the lockdown, dealing with grief and trauma with the bereavement process. We're currently about to run a session for Black Lives, for Black Mental Health Month, around mental health. And Shams is, we're not clued up on this agenda. We're not, we don't hold ourselves up to be exemplars in this space. So we're there to learn as well. So it's around giving that information as well that provides organizations with that, with some of those basic reminders that we all know and we need to hear, and to give ourselves permission as individuals. It's really interesting you mentioned it, because I had an email today from somebody who listened to a session I delivered back in July, and they said to me, I was half listening because I was actually doing something else, And but what I took from it was X, Y, and Z. I found that it was really helpful for a HR mediation project I've got coming up. It's actually been really useful for some of my people that I work with, and I've actually come back to it now, having had a few months of almost it's been mulling around in my brain, and I just wanted to say thank you. And that came today, and bear in mind it's the end of September. You know, and I think that's what I shared with my CEO, with Tara. I said, you know, this is the impact that we can have sometimes. We don't even know. And somebody has just bothered to take that few minutes to go. And, you know, even if they were half listening, it's still gone in there somewhere, you know, probably like listening to this podcast or a podcast, you know, you kind of, I know I'm the same. I might have something on, I might be walking, I might be cleaning the house or answering a couple of bits and pieces, but it's there, and it gets into your subconscious. And I think that's really important, because, you know, with the time we all have that's compressed down, time is such a valuable commodity. We make decisions about what we want to learn and take on board. So I think we can never have too much communication around, and when it's good quality communication, when it's impactful, you know, we can all take that little nugget from something. So that probably gives you an idea. But I mean, again, the programs, you know, one of our legal clients we've been working with, it'll be 5 years this year, you know, we've seen real shift in their HR data, which and their culture, which is fantastic. But we're talking long, like return on relationships, that takes time. You know, you're not going to see a silver bullet or a quick win overnight, because people aren't like that.
It's a big thing at the moment. So everyone's talking about mindfulness. You've got to do mindfulness because it helps the situation, it helps this, that, and the other. But, you know, that's one layer. But you need other layers on top of that, and another layer on top of that, like mindfulness or meditation or whatever you want to call it, and going into yourself and being present and all that. Like I do that, and it is good and it is wonderful. But you have to have something else on there, and people are stressed at the moment. And these big corporations, they got targets to hit, they got this, that, and the other, and then the boss miscommunicates information. And the problem is, for the audience out there, I'm throwing this device up in front of me, which is called a smartphone. We all have them. And like, this is also extremely terrible as well. It's also incredibly wonderful, and it does incredible things to us. But on the flip side of it, it's incredibly bad. It's like crack cocaine, because you're so addicted to it. You're looking for those dopamine hits. For people that don't know what dopamine is, that happy chemicals that I've got to like, and I've got this, that, and the other. The way that a lot of organizations are done now, when I've worked in, they don't speak to each other. All they do is they either do the instant messaging, which they miss that communication between two people. And I think that communication is hugely powerful. It's getting to know people, and it's like this conversation that we're having now, like we're understanding each other. We're not in the real space right now, but how are you overcoming those sort of challenges?
So it was really interesting for us this year, because we work with global clients, and we've done actually quite a lot online. But what it usually meant was we would travel into London. So interestingly, we did have an office for Shams, and then we weren't really maximizing the usage of it. And it wasn't the best place for what our ethos is about. It was in a basement with no natural light, and it was all tech people plugged in. So it didn't fit what we were about as a mental wealth company. So we all work remotely anyway, but we used to come together every Monday in a co-shared space, just to kind of, like you say, eyeball each other, have a chat, be more informal. So with our clients, what we often do is go into their headquarters, predominantly more London, but anywhere in the UK, and often deliver sessions over their internal, network. So whether it be Blue Jeans or a WebEx or Zoom, we'd run sessions, but they would be global. So we were quite used to doing that, actually. And in fact, last year I traveled overseas to Australia and Hong Kong and Europe, where I was delivering sessions in those locations regionally. So, again, it was very much around still doing that. So for us, we were able to translate everything online very, very quickly. That didn't pose a problem. I think the majority of the team were really comfortable with delivering online, and as you all know from doing this as well, that doesn't suit everybody. And I think it is a certain style. You have to adopt in-person style for the camera and for working a room. You know, we're very considerate around when we run workshops. For example, our mental wealth champion training or mental health first aid training, we use 2 facilitators. So it breaks up the kind of the whole one person speaking all day, so it gives a bit of a different vibe and a different energy. But also, more importantly, when we're talking about mental ill health subjects, or we're talking about suicidal intent, or we're talking about things that can be quite emotive or triggering for people, there's always that safety of having somebody else on the call that can jump on a private message or on WhatsApp, which is wonderful. And we make sure we have one-to-ones afterwards. So again, we have a 15-minute check-in with people as well. So it just makes it a bit more interesting. But no, we've been loving it, actually. We've been really innovative. I think you've got to either go with it and embrace it and be innovative, which is what I love about Shams, or you can kind of get bit staid and a bit, oh, it's another online training. And I think we've all been a bit Zoom fatigued, haven't we?
We all get like that. We're just going to go for a quick 10-second break, and we'll get back, and I really want to dig deep and find out what you're doing right now, because that's also fun. So welcome back. And again, I'm absolutely exhausted listening to you, because you give me so much stuff, and it's absolutely awesome. I've got a cup of tea and I haven't even looked at it yet. So thank you for so far. It sounds like you're making a really good, strong impact into companies that are actually realizing now that they have to start to look after their people in a better way. Like, you can do training and development and you can upskill and all that, but you just don't know what's going on inside people's mind. And as you say, when people are taking sick leave and people are not working to their full potential compared to when they were working up to their full potential, you just don't know what goes in. Sometimes I say you leave your baggage at the door and you walk in, but sometimes things carry on and they keep going on inside the mind and inside the unconscious, the subconscious mind, and it grates on you. So you don't work up to your full potential. And sometimes you do break down. Like, I've had a panic attack many years ago. I wouldn't want it on anyone, because and as you said before, you've had it as well. So what you are doing, you're making an impact, or you're making a dent, and a positive dent in the right direction, to make sure that everyone can realize what's going on and deal with it, and then hopefully move on with a better career, better life, or they leave, or that job is not right for them, or they move into another part of the career ladder. And I'm sure, because you've understand how change does happen in your previous career, you've actually understand the impact on change in sort of the bigger organization. But like steering a ship, sometimes it does take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So tell me, where are you now in the world? What are you doing?
So I am in Samos in Greece. I arrived here on Sunday morning. I'm currently on a 7-day quarantine. So last year, I launched my not-for-profit business, a social enterprise called Shams for Change. And the reason was I wanted to do 2 things. One is that I had studied for my MSc in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology, which I graduated end of last year, or this year I finished. Thank you. And I'm a doctoral candidate. I'm due to start my professional doctorate in September 2021 in experiential psychotherapy and counselling. And I wanted to create a hub for post-traumatic growth research, which is what I'm really passionate about. It's very much around my own story of coming to where I am, as I explained before, but also to see how coaching could be used as a way to achieve post-traumatic growth. So over this year, so I launched this in September when we had a October when we had our fourth birthday, sorry, for Shams. And then this year we've been full on with actually a couple of programs. So the one that I'm out here now is to work with a charity called Indigo Volunteers, and they work with NGOs based in the Greek Isles, pretty much around placing volunteers into roles with the NGOs to support the refugee community. Whilst we were in lockdown in early 2020. The organisation, we'd had a few conversations, and I ran a couple of sessions for the volunteers who were stuck in various places in Europe doing, in lockdown. So I ran some sessions around positive psychology and resilience and for them. And then I was asked to come out here. So COVID has unfortunately hit the camp out here in Samos. And last week, 2 weeks ago, there was the news whereby the camp Moira in Lesbos was burnt to the ground. So that housed about 13,000 refugees, and they've all been displaced in Lesbos. So I'm supporting volunteers out in Lesbos in Greece as well. So the next 2 weeks, starting from the 5th, I'm running 20 workshops. So these are 1 hour sessions. There's 4 in total of the program, but I'm running them twice a day for the volunteers to drop into. And I'm also running what we've called pit stops, which are, I took some research from therapeutic activism that had happened out in Calais, and they work with volunteers and they called them pit stops. And a bit like what I mentioned before about me running those drop-in sessions with the collective, it's very much the idea that a volunteer can come and have a chat with me about whatever they want to talk about. Somebody who doesn't know them, non-judgmental, and just have a conversation. And we've put the sign-up sheets out. We've already started to get individuals booking for one-to-ones and also sign up for these courses. And the sessions are everything around, understand, probably from what you've been talking about with your guests, meaning and purpose, which is a big part of volunteering, understanding your strengths and values, understanding self-care, and especially out here, what that looks and feels like for them as an individual, but also as the team. And the fourth one is understanding the challenges at work. So understanding about passion burnout, because the volunteers are hugely passionate. But obviously, like we've spoke about already, that can tip into burnout, especially when you're trying to do hope for other people on a global scale. And some of the volunteers are quite young, they're quite inexperienced in the world of work or the world, so it's and they don't often have loads of psychosocial support. So it was an opportunity just to come out here and give back. And for me, that's a big part of what Shams for Change is aiming to do. We do great work, as we've already spoke about, with Shams and the corporate world. But over the next year, I really hope we can start to then have Shams involved in Shams for Change, so we can get our corporates, employees who really want to do some volunteering or get involved with Shams for Change in various ways. And I think this year has really taught lots of us about giving a bit more to the communities we live and work in. I think, it's shifted everybody's perception of the world and our value of life, I think, as well, and our freedom. So I think it's been an interesting time to kind of reflect upon our own values and our own meaning. And I think sometimes that sounds really big question, the meaning of our life, but actually what we want to get from our life, what's important for us. Just as you doing this podcast is important for you around, getting those words out from people, from your guests. I think we all have our own little meanings, which do make that dent. I like the fact you use that, that little dent in the world. But collectively, if we all did that, it makes a huge difference. So
it's that ripple effect on, and you make a dent in the water, and the ripple effect actually moves on to someone else. And the way I like, and the one of the reasons I like to do these podcasts is if I can affect one person, could be many, but if the message that you're saying and we're collectively saying with these talks that we're having, and it makes a difference in one person's life and they change the way they think and they do something, I think that's incredible. These golden nuggets of wonderful information and processes and speaking up and talking up about, being honest with yourself, like something's not quite right. And sometimes you have to real dig deep and to find that honesty to actually articulate it rather than rumbling around in your head and having that internal dialogue to yourself And we know that the internal dialogue that we do have is horrendous, because we know it's our fight, flight, or freeze, the old reptilian brain that's kicking around and helping us and protecting us. And that's why we have these horrible thoughts inside of our heads. But if we can actually start to self-talk ourselves into a better way, and I think what you're doing, back to where you are right now, is an incredible job. And I think there's a lot of more companies out there that should be doing something like this and making an impact moving forward. Number one, it gets you a wonderful name for yourself, but in a positive way. As much as you are doing some positive work within corporations, but having that team out in Greece or France or wherever, I think that can add a massive impact. What are your other plans do you have?
So we're working with an organisation called We Are, which is a Birmingham-based charity for women who have survived domestic abuse, domestic violence. So this year we've delivered a 6-month pilot coaching program with the women who've gone through their freedom program, of which one of your guests, Alfreda, is, and Julia as well has been supporting.
And there's also another guest that is expert in that area, Suzanne Doyle. She's also deals with that sort of trauma women.
Okay.
So I'll introduce you at a later stage.
Wonderful. But yeah, so they've been involved in that this year, and that's gone absolutely. We've come to the end of that. I mean, I'm quite amazed actually. I think coming to Samos has given me a bit of that headspace to reflect on this year, and actually what we've achieved is a bit, in some cases, overwhelming, because I think when you're in it and you're just doing it and you're passionate about it, you don't really think about it. You don't really think about the bigger picture. But that's gone really well, and that we're looking to kind of pull together a program for 2021. So that's evolved, and the research that's come out of that. And what was wonderful was that I was able to submit our evidence to the government review. So the government have been putting together a review looking at how workplaces can support survivors of domestic abuse. And I met with the chief policy advisor for that group from the Minister from Small Businesses, Paul Scully, so his team, and just talk through what the pilot program had done. And they were really interested, because again, it's that longer term recovery support. And I think for me, this is a big part of my own journey. And I think, it doesn't always, when you've been through a traumatic experience, it can take years to get over. And often there's crisis support for various mental health conditions or traumatic circumstances, but it's more longer term. And I really believe that coaching can help with that process. I think people often think coaching is either really up at the end of business coaching, or they think it's that kind of fluffy live coaching, that they see somebody who's So and there's almost that gap in between, that actually coaching can be a real holistic part of being able to move forwards in many shapes and forms. So that was kind of what I want, and to have it accessible for everybody, and for groups that wouldn't usually have the opportunity to even consider or think about coaching, especially from professionals who would usually charge a lot more, and charge for their time. I think it's been really rewarding for. I know the coaches have just got as much from it as well as the coachees. The feedback I've had from the coaches is, wow, it's really empowered me, it's changed me, it's given me something so much richer. So it's almost given them as much as the individual.
I was going to say, it's sometimes getting someone to listen to you, if they're talking, which is the first step, and they're sort of opening up to what's going on inside. I think that's just the best step. Sometimes it's just to listen, sit there and listen, and that's all you need. Unfortunately, I had one of my oldest and best friends. I wish he had it, and he sort of committed suicide. Well, he committed suicide in February of this year, even before the lockdown. And I wish he had someone to talk to before he went into his own internal dialogue and all that. So to reach out to whoever that is listening right now, I think it is absolutely 100% important. Push your ego to one side. Whatever you might be thinking, oh, I'm too big for this, I can deal with this. Reach out to someone that can help, or someone that can just listen to. So, Ruth, could you do me a favor?
Yeah.
For people that are actually listening to this and can't see this, could you hold your hand out like that?
Yeah.
And go over like that.
Yeah.
And go tap your shoulder.
Thank you.
Like, it's just really to say appreciate that moment of what you are doing, and sort of take a big breath and say, well, thanks to yourself. And because sometimes we move so forward in time, we don't actually realize where we're at. And I think what you need to do, and just to say thank you to yourself, and I think you've done a wonderful job. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, it's been lovely.
So how can people find out more about your organization?
So they can head to our website, which is champsconsult.com. So champsconsult.com. So champsconsult.com. And you can find us with that same handle on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. And then from there, you'll be able to find me as well. So I have my own. And also Champs for Change has its own LinkedIn page and its own Instagram as well. And that's Champs for Change. So it's really easy to connect to us once you find us somewhere. There'll be lots of other ways.
Brilliant.
We're everywhere. We're everywhere.
You're everywhere. Ruth, you've been absolutely incredible. And thank you again. And I take your hat off for all the positive stuff that you're doing and make an impact. And it is making an impact on lots and lots and lots of people, for the people that you are speaking to. So thank you. So you listen to Jason Cooper from Positive People and for serenityradio.co.uk. And this shall be coming out in November time, so I believe. So, but listen to all the other episodes as well, because they're hugely impactful. And if you can take one golden nugget out of this, you'll be making an impact on yourself. So thank you once again.